Liz Truss, remember her? Described Mick Lynch as a key figure in what she called the anti-growth coalition. Now he is the most recognisable trade unionist in Britain, and she is a relatively difficult question in a pub table quiz. Prime Ministers come and go, but the bigger issues, of course, remain the same. Please give a very big Dublin welcome, a big Céad Míle Fáilte to Mick Lynch.
Good evening.
The shortest serving Prime Minister in British history was an Irishman called George Canning, and he died in office. And they took that away from us, Mick. I'm really angry about that. Can we begin? I suppose we'll begin with, before you became General Secretary of the RMT, there was Mick Cash, whose family come from County Kildare. There seems to be, in your line of work, a long pedigree of Irish trade unionists. So Jim Prendergast, who fought in the Spanish Civil War and who did so much to remove the racial barrier on the London Underground. The railway workers and the underground workers in Britain, there's so much Irish blood there.
Yeah, there's a lot of Irish people in the trade union movement. I mean, Mick Whelan is the leader of ASLEF. He went to the same school as me, 2 years above. Same church. Sharon Graham went to the same school as my wife Mary, sitting over there, Sacred Heart Convent, so you can guess what that's all about. And through the whole history, there's been so many Irish people involved in the Labour movement. The Chartists were led by Irish people looking for a bit of democracy and a bit of social justice, as we now call it. So it's been right through our movement. I don't know what it is. I don't know why they had to send an Irish woman over to get the nurses on strike after 110 years, but they've done it. And I don't know why we're prominent at the minute. It must be the gift of the gab or something. I don't know what's going on, but we've been thrust into the spotlight, and we've got to take our chance. And I want to say to all the Irish Labour movement and all the people, we're so delighted with the feedback we get and the support we get, especially from SIPTU and all the other unions. SIPTU have been a great friend of ours. We've got a relationship with SIPTU that goes back to the 50s. When we gave up, our union gave up its railway membership in Ireland because that's what we thought we should do. A lot of people over here didn't want us to do it because they were worried about the Irish Labour movement at the time. So we've got to keep those bonds going. It's the most parochial bit of internationalism, I suppose, but there's a lot of differences in the communities. But we've got to make sure that this movement spreads out from just a few people to make sure it spreads across all of our communities and all new people getting involved. So I don't know why it is, but it is what it is.
Your father was born in Cork in 1922, the year we painted the post boxes. I always think of that great James Connolly line, if you remove the British Army, you don't transform Irish society. What is the great point of it all? And I suppose he came of age during the economic war. Britain, ironically, had lots of work for Irish people at that time. And I love how you described your old fella in a recent interview. I think this is great. He was a straight down the line Labour supporter, maybe a bit Fianna Fáil.
Maybe.
What was the politics of the household you grew up in?
Well, I just want to deal with one thing about this Dara Lynch and the Lynches. What my old man would have said was, we're not related to any Jack Eanes in any way whatsoever. But there you go. That's starting another battle that we don't want to get into. But well, I don't know what it is. When we grew up in that period, I was born in '62, which is a long time ago now, and left school in '78. I left school into a world where everyone that I came across was in a trade union. And my old man's life in the union movement that started on the building sites. He worked for Murphy's. He didn't like John Murphy very much. There wasn't much in common with them. And then he was a shop steward, and then he brought us up that way. But everybody seemed to be in a union. But in our world, everybody seemed to be from some part of Ireland as well. Even the black people seemed to be from some part of Ireland, because in our world, everyone was a Catholic. And that's the way we were brought up. We were brought up, you had to go to Mass, you had to join a union, you had to speak up. I don't know why that is. That's kind of died out there. There's plenty of the Irish community in Britain, my contemporaries, that have got into business. Many of them are now doing things like quantity surveying. Every other Irish person I meet in London seems to be a quantity surveyor now, telling all the the Bulgarians and the Polish people what to do, and it's all changing. But there has been a history of developing it, and I think it's rubbed off on me. But you always end up here by accident. Every single person in this room that is a trade union activist or a labour movement activist, it gets there because somebody's brought you on, and then somebody's moved on and you take their place. And that's the way we've got to keep moving the movement forward and making sure that we've got a new generation of people that are coming through.
When I think about Robert Tressell and the book and everything else, it reminds me, when I think about the bigger picture of the British left, things like the Clarion Club, the Left Wing Book Club, Tribune magazine, which is now edited by an Irishman. We're really making our land grab there. The working men's clubs. There seems to be a kind of working class culture in Britain, a kind of working class counterculture, we might say, in a way that we didn't quite manage here. But is that a fair point that the like Tressell's book and all of that, this working class counterculture has always been strong?
It has been, but we've got to fight to preserve it. I find in a lot of communities around England especially, I mean, I did a very big meeting up in South Wales recently, which was a tremendous meeting, very similar to this, took place in a chapel with a Welsh male voice choir, poetry, people talking about the mining disputes. But in England, even in the former manufacturing towns, in the mining towns and the mill towns, there's this onslaught of nonsense, celebrity culture, the stuff we've got going on today over there, the trappings of all this made-up history that we hear about. It's all nonsense, this stuff that they put together about it's going back 1,000 years. It's all rubbish, all that stuff. It's made up by the Victorians for the moving picture industry that came along. So there's a constant need to go back. We've got this slogan that we use, the past we inherit, the future we build. And it's a cliche. If we don't know what's happened to us and what our forebears had to give to get us this stuff, and in Britain the welfare state and the NHS and secondary education and tertiary education, we have to go back to these communities and tell them how they got it. Because these things that we've got that we find precious in Britain, the pillars of the welfare state, education, the NHS, the pension and all the rest of it, they were never given to us. We had to fight for them and people had to die for them.
Yes.
And we've got to make sure they don't slip away through passivity and non-involvement and complacency. So we've got to wake people up in all our communities, and that is probably true, I'd imagine, in Irish working class communities. We've got to keep the flame alive, and history is a vitally important part of that.
Yes. It's really fascinating in the United Ireland debate. Sometimes the NHS is brought up, and unionists will say, "Well, I want to keep the NHS. The NHS is so important." The NHS has been under attack for decades now. The NHS is not the NHS of Dave Bevan anymore. It's a battered service in so many ways.
It's battered and it's being privatised every day. I picture it, the capitalists in this situation are like snakes. They're consuming it constantly. Yeah. It's being privatised every day of the week. Everybody involved in any part of the national health system will tell you it's going because it's being consumed by private profit. The same as the railways have, the same as the care service in Britain, which used to be in council, local authority hands, delivered in the community by the community. And now everything not only has a value, it's got to have a price that delivers profit. And we've got to fight back against that, because the oldest idea is that it's in this book, in Tressell's book, he puts this position that all of the wealth of the world, the entire globe, is made by working people. And when you strip it all down, the problem is it's not distributed properly. So all of that stuff, including culture, including care services, including manufacturers' goods, belongs to all of us. And we have to go back to the fundamentals that he was talking about to protect and preserve these institutions, because they didn't evolve naturally. They came about because of that government in 1945. Clement Attlee's government came along and changed the direction of the UK as it was at that time. And they were resisted every step of the way by Churchill, by the Ulster Unionists, and by all the forces of reaction in our society. And you had that problem here with Noel Brown and the mother and baby services that were trying to go on. They all line up, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's the establishment in Britain, or whether it's the professional politicians. And we have to fight our ground as working people for an independent workers' movement that saves those institutions.
Before inviting you to give the kind of inaugural keynote of the Robert Tressell Festival, one thing about the dispute in England that was so interesting to watch a strike happen in the modern age and how a union official could go viral, so to speak, on TikTok and Instagram and all of that, and those great clashes with Kay Burley especially. I'd never seen a newsreader roll her eyes on television before Kay Burley. You went through her like a knife through hot butter. It was beautiful to watch. But you and Eddie also, you went into some very interesting places where we don't tend to go. For example, joe.co.uk, a media aimed at young people. You went down the pub, did an interview with them. Did the strike highlight to you the need to build a effective left-wing media?
Well, yeah, naturally. These people are not our friends. I can predict next week, we're going on strike next Saturday, a national strike. ASLEF are out on Friday, we're out on Saturday. And I can predict, they call me everything, and Phil said this, they call me a Fenian, they call me a Tim, they call me a communist, a Stalinist, a Leninist, a Trotskyist.
And a few insults as well.
Yeah, and a Putinite. I'm trying to wreck everything. But what we're doing is standing up for ourselves. And what's been good in this period, there's a lot of alternative media now. There's a lot of, I say younger people, these are people in their late 20s and 30s and 40s. They're younger than me, certainly. But they have got the ability to reach people very directly without the editorial control of the Murdochs of this world and whoever's running the press over here these days, and go direct and give the authentic message of the people on strike. Of course, when they film our people, and we've had it already, and the posties have had it in the Royal Mail dispute, which is another major dispute over there, they sack them as soon as they can get their voices. That's why we have to put the officials up to do the speaking on their behalf. But it's vitally important that we create an alternative media platform for the left. And I don't care which parts of the left, and I don't want it to split, but what we have been able to do is get that voice out. And we've been able to expose the likes of Piers Morgan and these lunatics, I think they are. They've completely lost the plot, I think, that they can't engage in an argument about an issue or an idea. So we're able to do that as working people. And I think the more we do it, the better it is. And we have to create these networks of support in meetings, but also on the airwaves and across the globe. And we've got to reach out to everyone while we're doing that and give a voice to the workers who haven't got one.
Brilliant. So before we conclude, as we can only conclude such an event with the red flag, it is a great honour to invite Mick Lynch to give the inaugural address to the Robert Tressell Festival.
Please. Where am I going? But what I was going to say, it's a great honour to be here. It's a great honour to be in Ireland and to have this reception that we're getting. We were in Belfast last week and got a lot of warm reception, and we're getting it here today. And of course, last year I was in Cork for a bit, and we got a great reception there as well. The first pint I had in Cork, I was off duty, by the way. I walked into this boozer on my own and said to the fella, "Can I have a pint of Beamish?" Which is what they have down there. You lot don't know that, but... And he said, "Are you Mick Lynch?" And I said, "Yeah." This is the first time I met him. He's covered in dreadlocks. And he said, "I'm the chairman of the Cork City Sinn Féin branch. It's good to have you back home." So that's the way it's been going. Anyway. So it's great to do this meeting, and I'm delighted. I'm going to call him Noonan, this fella, because that was his... Well, we found out today he had lots of names, but Noonan's the name that we know him of. And what I want to say about this festival, it's a great initiative. It's great that it's being done, and I hope that it grows and thrives and finds a prominent place in the calendar of our labour movement. And I really would encourage you to reach out to some of the stuff that goes on in Britain. We've got the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival, which is like a mini Glastonbury. Glastonbury itself is increasingly becoming a festival of ideas and a festival of the labour movement as well, with trade unionists and others speaking at it. We've got the Banners Festival next week, I think, in Wakefield, in the heart of the Yorkshire coalfield. And if you ever get the chance to go to the Durham Miners Association, it is so inspiring. I was there last year, and unbelievably, I spoke to a crowd of 200,000 people at that event. I don't think they were all listening to me. There were a fair amount of people rolling around on the deck at the back drinking Strongbow cider. But I think I got the message across anyway. But the point is, what all that's about is we have to reclaim our place in society. And tonight we've had these fantastic performances. And today during the workshops and the sessions, we've had this battle of ideas, which is a tremendous thing that we've got to engage in. But it's also got to include the battle for the arts, the battle for culture, the battle for poetry, the battle for performance. That's all part of our movement, I believe. And one of the mistakes we've made over the last 30 or 40 years, I think, is to put ourselves in silos. Here's the trade unions. Here are the professional politicians over there. There are some people campaigning on the environment. These people are campaigning about housing. These ones are campaigning to get their identity recognised in whichever way they want. And we've not brought it together. And I know there are attempts to do that in every community, but if we're going to build a real working class movement that is embedded in every village, every parish, every county, every city, and every forum that we can go into, we've got to bring them all together. And I want to pay tribute to Ronan Burtonshaw, one of your own, who's brought that Enough is Enough campaign together in England. And what we did there, we achieved something that we never thought we'd do. We were going into the mosques, we were going into any temple, Gurdwaras, Sikh temples, we were going into Catholic cathedrals, into Church of England cathedrals, and the whole community was coming out to hear this message. Because I'm absolutely convinced that working people, working class people, even if they don't even call themselves working class people, they don't think about that, are ready for change. They're ready to change our society, whether it's in Britain, whether it's in Ireland, wherever the jurisdiction, or whether it's in France or Europe or America. I think working class people are crying out for change. And we've got to be in the vanguard as a trade union movement of delivering that change and facilitating it as far as we can. So this fella Noonan, it was an incredible achievement. And he never, as was being said in the film, he never got to see the results of that. And he wouldn't have known what the effect would be, particularly in the English-speaking world outside Ireland. It is a shame that he was never known so much here, even after his death. But it's not surprising, because when he wrote that book, we were on the eve of calamity. World War I was such an epochal change in the history of working people, and we heard a bit about that in the seminars. But his kind of politics, this Marxist analysis by working class people of working class conditions, was a phenomenon of Victorian and Edwardian, I'm sorry to use those terms in Ireland, but Victorian and Edwardian culture. They were really having that battle. And the battle never really got settled because it was wiped out in Europe by World War I. And their beliefs that they could create a different world largely through the ballot box and bring revolutionary social change through parliamentary politics is a politics that was wiped out. And it was wiped out in this country mainly by the national struggle, not just the rise of independent Ireland movement, but also the rise of unionism, because unionism distracted and split our class. And we have to recognise that. And these kind of politics were gone, but they went on to inspire. And he's an interesting character because he was a very difficult person, Tressell. Like a lot of people on the left, they're a bit of a pain in the arse, some of them. I don't know if you found that. But he wouldn't, I don't think, have supported 1916. That wasn't his politics. His politics was so fundamentalist about socialism. They didn't believe in countries at all. They didn't believe in the concept of money. And in The Money Trick, he illustrates very, very lucidly and accessibly what capitalism is all about, and in fact that money is a problem in and of itself, where we're in the game as trade unionists of getting people more money. And he would have called what we do a waste of time. And that's a really difficult concept for trade unionists to get their heads around. He would say we're in the business of palliatives. And he called all reformists palliatives. And of course that was going on in the Russian movement, the argument between, you've heard about the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks and all that stuff. He would have condemned 1917, the Russian Revolution. He would have condemned all that kind of adventurism, because his belief was that you can't make socialism without making socialists. And you cannot have a vanguard elite that leads workers into some kind of utopia. It has to be done by the workers themselves on their own behalf when they're informed and knowledgeable about scientific socialism. So read the book. I would implore you to read it. It's challenging. It's in a different type of language. It's very long compared to what some of us are used to these days, especially with the way social media works, with however many characters you get. But it really takes you to the heart of what socialism is about and what it can achieve. And I read it when I was 14. I haven't read it since, but it has underpinned everything that I believe in, but not everything that I do and not everything that our movement does. So I'm going to cut this short because I can't see if people are blinking at me or not and saying, let's go. But it is really important, I believe, that this type of belief is gone into, but it's also necessary to recognise the shortcomings, because what those socialists didn't have was a means or a programme to deliver change. And that can be through reformist politics, radical reformist politics of the likes of Attlee and others that have reformed countries going back across the ages. Or it can be a revolutionary programme in the real sense. But what he didn't have was a means to do it. And if you compare him to Connolly, he was almost a contemporary in some ways. Their backgrounds or their life experience were very, very similar. They had a life of abject poverty all of the time. And people forget that about Connolly. I'm very interested in Connolly's time before 1916 and before the revolutionary struggle, when he went out to America, when he was trying to organise people up in the north and break down sectarianism. That cost him his entire family life and the entire ability to be a normal person in society. It was an extreme sacrifice. And these people had to make that, and they were always threatened by extreme poverty, indeed destitution, as it's understood, and the threat of early death. And that's what they were faced with. We can't sometimes believe the conditions that some of our forebears had to fight against. One of their nightmares in this town and in all the towns in Britain was that their children would fall into beggary, living on the street, in the workhouse and all the rest of it. And we must never forget that that was common to all of the cities in these two islands, and it was common all over Europe. It was common in America. That's what they were faced with, and that's why they fought so hard to give us what we've got today. And that's why the forces of reaction and the forces of capitalism are so keen now to take it away from us. And it's our duty as socialists and as trade unionists to make sure that they don't ever take our grip off these institutions of the welfare state, these institutions of the labour movement that we've built up. And we can never let the sacrifices that Connolly and Larkin and all the people that followed them and admired them gave to us as a gift for our generations. I'm going to get rid of that entirely because I can't read it and I haven't read a word of it, so I'm just shuffling with it. But what I'm going to do is finish now. We've had disputes in Britain that have been quite remarkable. Many of us in the movement thought we'd never get back to this position where we can assert ourselves so readily and so forcefully onto that agenda. And that has taken a few generations of new people that have come into the movement who've been trying to say to people, you will not achieve anything by just asking for it. You have to back up your requests and your demands at the negotiating table with industrial muscle, right? If you don't have the potential to go on strike and take that action, you will get nothing at that negotiating table. And you have to back it up by getting everyone else on the streets to support you. And what are they doing in Britain now? The legislation that they're bringing in, you may have heard of it, the minimum service levels. They've lost the argument on austerity. Don't forget, we've had austerity in Britain since 2008, since those clowns Cameron and Osborne got in. And they've been screwing the public sector, they've been screwing the private sector wages to the floor ever since. Some of our people in the public sector in Britain have not had a pay rise against inflation for more than 12 years. And that's why they're ready to fight back. And that's why that it's so important for the trade union movement to give them a voice and join up those struggles. So the task in front of us is to win the claims. It is to win the disputes, to cling on to our terms and conditions that our forebears handed down to us through the struggles that they took forward on our behalf. It is to hang on to the welfare state that we've built took so long. But we've also got to look up. We've got to look up not just from the pay claim, not just from the shift roster that you're negotiating. There's a bigger world to be won, and that's what Noonan and others were talking about. It's what Connolly was talking about. We must see ourselves as an internationalist movement, as a global movement that puts the hand out and the hand up to any worker in any country, of any colour, of any heritage and any religion. That's got to be what we've got to do. Keep our eyes on the prize. Lift up the hearts and minds of our people. Win the battle of ideas. Win the battle of culture. Win the battles in the workplace. Win the battles on the street. We have got a world to win. We've got to change our society. We've got to change our world. And we've got to win for our people. Let's do it together. Thank you very much for listening. Solidarity to every worker in the world. Thank you very much.
You're saving a red flag.